So I've had a lot of requests about my process for toning my drawing paper. It's not complicated. It's a very, very simple process. Now, because I choose to tone a kind of a thin paper, there is unfortunately a second step to this, and that's getting the paper flat. So this is Strathmore 400. It's the 80 pound Strathmore 400, and I use the smooth for toning my drawing paper because the one attribute when you get paper wet like this, it raises the grain. And so I find that the smooth paper then becomes a little bit more like the medium surface that Strathmore makes. So anyway, these are just a couple that I've already done, been in my drawer. And when I do this, this can be kind of a long drawn out process. So I just pick a day and I just do a whole bunch of these, all kinds of shapes and sizes. I also wanted to mention that this is, if when you'll see this later in the video, you'll see how bad that paper warps when it's all dried out. So this is Fabriano, oh geez, let's see, I think it's 140 pound hot press watercolor paper. And so I toned these a while back. I just put some tape around the edges, which left a white border on them. And that one actually, I double toned that one. I toned it, took the tape off, and then toned it again, so it gave it kind of a dual tone. So I just want to say there's a zillion ways to do this. It just, you're only limited by your imagination, really. But using a watercolor paper it pretty much removes the flattening, the process you need to have to flatten them back out again, because it's watercolor paper. It's meant to get wet. So the first thing I do is I usually just use a clean brush, but I guess it doesn't really matter. That just had a bunch of pigment in it. So usually, maybe I'll do this twice. I have a clean brush and I just get this paper wet. And you can wet both sides actually. You can flip it over and wet the other side. It doesn't really matter. Sometimes when you do that, it wrinkles a little bit less. Oh, it looks like I got a little bit of glare from my windows. I didn't think about that. Yeah, but if you keep with this just a little bit longer, it will flatten back out again. And I've actually soaked this paper before. I've just taken like a tub and soaked them, and that's actually an easier way to do this, because you can just soak a bunch of them ahead, just put them in that bath, and they're ready for you. And you just grab them and tone them. It goes a lot faster, but I noticed, at least with this paper, I think what happens is the cut edge takes in more water than the two surface, the front and the back surface. And you think, once it's all dried out, it would just, and especially after I put it in my dry mount press, it would go back flat, but it never does. It leaves this little kind of wrinkled edge around most of the edges. And so I've kind of gone back to just doing it this way, which is a little more time consuming. Oh, I did forget to mention that. So this is gouache. That I knew I forgot something. Oh, and this is just a old Lang nickel watercolor brush. You can use any brush. You can use this is an old ratty chip brush that works really good because it does just kind of a different texture. But I'm using gouache, and I usually use gouache. But I've used acrylic, I've used casein, I've used watercolor. They all work. It's just kind of whatever paint you have, as long as it's a water medium, not oil. And I think the only difference for me really is when you're drawing on them, I've noticed the acrylic stays put. So no matter how much you erase on it, the pigment doesn't come off. And with the watercolor, the gouache, and the casein, if you start rubbing with an eraser, it will actually lift some of the pigment. I don't have a preference one way or the other. It's just something you need to expect. You can make it work for you, or actually that can work against you. So I was trying to match one that I've already done. It's almost, the cool thing about this is they're unique. Each one of these you do is unique. And you try to match something you just did, but it's going to come out just a little bit different. It's just a patina for paper. It's kind of neat. So that paper is starting to do that little, it's getting some little buckle wrinkles on the edge, but I think those will come out. So yeah, you can do this any way you want. You can tone part of the paper. You can take a smooth brush, like a fan brush, and you can kind of get out all the lines. I actually kind of like the lines. I try to leave a little randomness, kind of a random texture in it, or it's an implied texture. Okay, that one looks good. So that's going to dry lighter. The last thing I'd like to mention before I pull this one up is when you're doing this, be very, very careful of the surface, because this isn't a watercolor paper. When it's wet, it's really, really, really delicate. It doesn't take anything to scratch it. And this you'll see the scratches because they take more pigment, and that'll always be there. So I've scratched it with my fingernails before. I've scratched it with these old ratty brushes. If I get the ferrule too close to it, I've scratched it. So keep that in mind. Okay, I'm going to just do one more for everybody. So I just thought I'd just flip that one over, and you can see if once you get the backside wet, the paper really begins to expand. You can just kind of keep pulling it a little bit as it expands. But really, once it's dry and you press it, those wrinkles will come out. Those shouldn't affect it. That's about it. That's all there is to it. So this paper, unlike the watercolor paper, this paper is not as happy when you tape it down, because the edges are dry under the tape, and then the part that's wet does all this wrinkling. And so with this paper, I don't usually do a border on it, but you don't have to spread the pigment out all the way. You can leave the edges more white. You can let this dry. You can come back in and put a different color over the top of it, so you get kind of a dual tone. The possibilities are just endless. It's just up to your own imagination and your materials. And like I said, I would just do a lot of experimentation. Well, here it is after it dried on my floor just naturally. I haven't done anything to it. And it actually, it went pretty flat. It's just got that wave in it. And here's a few others, some little dimples. Generally a little warped, but I'm quite surprised they're not really that bad. Now here's a couple. You can see this is more typical. And then for some reason, so these are all from the same batch. I guess that just shows variety. You can go from that. It just depends. I guess it really depends on how you tone it, how much water it takes. I don't know what it is, but I mean, look at that one. That one just completely curled up. If that's what you had, you could probably press that under some books for a couple days, and even that would kind of come out. But let me show you what I have that will fix all of these. This is my dry mount press, and I haven't really had it that long. I picked it up just local, used, and they're generally used more, and I think just mostly photography. At least that's how I associate them, is mounting photographs. Before I had this though, I just used a clothing iron, and I'll just show you that at the end of the video. I used that for years and years and years. This just makes it easier. So if you don't have one of these, there are other ways to do this. But it's pretty simple. I just turned it up to maybe a couple hundred degrees and just take one of those warped pieces of paper, and you just stick it in there for about 30 seconds, or I don't know. I don't think there's any science, because this is not what this was meant for. So if you had one of these, you'd be setting it to the temperature of the hot mount glue. The glue, the glue is going to melt at a particular temperature. So you're just trying to melt that glue for whatever you're doing. But in this case, just since we're trying to flatten paper, it's just pretty much fly by the seat of your pants. And there it is. It's hot. It's very hot, but it's very, very flat. It's kind of come right back to the way it was before I toned it. Sometimes, like I mentioned earlier, you can get those little dimply edges along the corner that don't ever press out. This one I don't think has any. That came out pretty nice. And if I get those little dimply edges that I just can't get out, I'll just trim it right off. It's not a big deal. And that is about it. So I really like that press. I mean, that's made my job a lot easier, but I know that, for a lot of you, that's just not an option, which was one of the reasons why I hesitated for a long time even to make this video, just because getting these back flat is kind of a challenge. But before I got that press, this is my clothing iron, and you can use that. Settings, again, you'll have to just experiment, but it seemed like the higher settings, like on the cotton or linen settings, with no steam, of course, that would just warp them again. And again, you know, right back to, if you want to avoid all of the flattening out process, just use watercolor paper in the first place and tone it, and you don't have to worry about reflattening it. So anyway, I hope you guys got something out of that video, and best of luck with your paper toning projects. All right, thank you for watching.